One of the first threats we were confronted with upon entering office is North Korea, and it was the first policy area that we felt an urgency to deal with. And I think, as many of you have watched over the last several months, that threat has materialized in the ways that we expected it would. And that's why early on we identified it as a very urgent matter, and the North Koreans have certainly proven the urgency of that to us. We initiated a sustained and continued intensified campaign on what I like to call peaceful pressure, because the options available to us, I think, as all of you well understand, are limited, and particularly if we think we are operating under a short period of time. So we felt the appropriate thing to do first was to seek peaceful pressure on the regime in North Korea to have them develop a willingness to sit and talk with us and others, but with an understanding that a condition of those talks is there is no future where North Korea holds nuclear weapons or the ability to deliver those nuclear weapons to anyone in the region, much less to the homeland. In doing so, we've sought to partner with China. China does account for 90% of economic activity with North Korea. The Chinese have been very clear with us that we share the same objective, a denuclearized Korean peninsula. They do not see it in their interest for North Korea to have nuclear weapons, just as we do not see it in anyone's interest. China has ways that they can put pressure on and influence the North Korean regime because of this significant economic relationship that no one else has. We've been very clear with the Chinese. We certainly don't blame the Chinese for the situation in North Korea. Only the North Koreans are to blame for this situation. But we do believe China has a special and unique relationship because of this significant economic activity to influence the North Korean regime in ways that no one else can. And that's why we continue to call upon them to use that influence with North Korea to create the conditions where we can have a productive dialogue. We don't think having a dialogue where the North Koreans come to the table assuming they're going to maintain their nuclear weapons is productive. So that's really what the objective that we are about is. We have reaffirmed our position towards North Korea, that what we are doing, we do not seek a regime change. We do not seek the collapse of the regime. We do not seek an accelerated reunification of the peninsula. We do not seek an excuse to send our military north of the 38th parallel. And we're trying to convey to the North Koreans, we are not your enemy, we're not your threat, but you are presenting an unacceptable threat to us, and we have to respond. And we hope that at some point they will begin to understand that, and that we would like to sit and have a dialogue with them about the future that will give them the security they seek and the future economic prosperity for North Korea, but that will then promote economic prosperity throughout Northeast Asia. This is going to be a continued effort to put ever greater pressure on the North Korean regime, because our other options obviously are not particularly attractive. Now, in saying that, I want to acknowledge a couple of people, and I'm going to give some credit to people as I go through this. These first 6 months, we've been carrying out this activity, as you know, with largely people in acting assistant secretary positions, using our ambassadors, the strength of the organization, and I'm quite proud of what we've accomplished. And in dealing with North Korea, acting assistant secretary Susan Thornton and Ambassador Joseph Yoon have been stellar in helping us develop these policies and carry them out. Susan Thornton also has been key to our relationship with China, and I think it's important that everyone understand that North Korea does not define the relationship with China. Our relationship with China obviously is much broader, and if you go back to the summit in Mar-a-Lago between President Trump and President Xi, much of that summit was a discussion about what should the relationship between the U.S. and China be. It has been defined since the opening of China with the historic Nixon visit, the adoption of the One China policy, the 3 documents and agreements, and that has given us a long period of no conflict between China and the U.S., creating conditions for enormous economic growth and prosperity in China, which the U.S. and the rest of the world has seen benefits from as well. That has defined the last 40 to 50 years of our relationship. The question now is that we believe we're at a bit of a pivot point in that relationship because of how China has progressed now to become the 2nd largest economy in the world, and they will continue to grow in their importance to the global economy. what should define this relationship for the next 50 years? And those are the discussions that we have with the Chinese in the broadest contours. How should we define this relationship, and how do we ensure that economic prosperity to the benefit of both countries in the world can continue, and that where we have differences, because we will have differences, we do have differences, that we will deal with those differences in a way that does not lead to open conflict. And that has been the success of the past policy. It's one that we must continue, but we recognize conditions have changed, and to simply rely upon the past may not serve either one of us well. So these are very in-depth conversations and discussions we have with the Chinese, and we test this relationship through things like the situation in North Korea. Can we work together to address this global threat where we have a common objective, and where we have differences in the South China Sea and we have some trading differences that need to be addressed? Can we work through those differences in a way without it leading to open conflict and find the solutions that are necessary to serve us both? Out of Mar-a-Lago came, I think, some very important commitments to one another. We established 4 very high-level dialogues. We had many, many dialogues with the Chinese in the past, over 20 dialogues, but these were at a level that we felt were insufficient to deal with this question of our relationship. So the Chinese agreed to designate very high-level individuals. So we have 4 dialogues. The diplomatic and security dialogue is led by myself and Secretary Mattis with our counterparts in China. We have had 2 meetings of the diplomatic and security dialogue. The economic and trade dialogue has met twice. That's led by Secretary Mnuchin and Secretary Ross. We have 2 other dialogues that are yet to meet: law enforcement and cybersecurity, and then social or people to people. And so these are really to help us explore the tough issues that exist for the 2 largest economies in the world and 2 significant military powers, as to how do we want to deal with these issues. And they've served, I think they've served us well to this point, and they've been quite helpful in us advancing this understanding of one another's interest. So we will continue those. And again, I want to thank Assistant Secretary Susan Thornton for her help in advancing these. So I want to turn to Russia next. And the relationship, as you know, in Russia continues to be under considerable stress. As I indicated in my first trip to Moscow and meetings at the Kremlin with President Putin, following those meetings, the relationship was at a historic low since the end of the Cold War, and it could get worse. And the question, I think, of the events of the last week or so is it getting worse, or can we maintain some level of stability in that relationship and continue to find ways to address areas of mutual interest and ways in which we can deal with our differences without those becoming open conflicts as well. We have explored in the early days one area of mutual interest, which is terrorism. And we've chosen the theater in Syria as a place in which we test our ability to work together. We share the common view of ISIS as a threat to both of our countries, and so we are committed to the defeat of ISIS, Daesh, other terrorist organizations. And then we are committed to the stability of Syria following the battle to defeat ISIS. Clearly, Russia has aligned itself early on in the conflict with the Syrian regime and Bashar al-Assad, which we find to be unacceptable. So we're working with Russia through how do we achieve the end state, which is a unified Syria, not divided, but a Syria that has the opportunity for the Syrian people to put in place a new constitution, have free and fair elections, and select a new leadership. And it continues to be our view that the Assad regime has no role in the future governing of Syria. The sequencing of all of that, we're open to, as long as that's what is achieved at the end. The second condition we have is that Iran's military influence, the direct presence of Iranian military forces inside of Syria, they must leave and go home. Whether those are Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces or whether those are paid militias, foreign fighters that Iran has brought into Syria in this battle. Those are our 2 end-state conditions, and those are shared by many of our coalition partners the world over. So we're working with the Russians. We've achieved one small measure of success by establishing, working in concert with Jordan to create a de-escalation zone, a zone of ceasefire in the southwest part of Syria, which thus far is holding. I think the achievement out of this is civilians are not getting killed, and that was our objective, is to stop the massive bombing attacks and the artillery attacks that have led to so many civilian deaths. It is our hope that this first zone of deconfliction will hold with the Russians' assistance and the Russians delivering on their commitments, and that we can find ways to replicate this in other areas, in particular in the northern part of Syria, as we continue to liberate areas from ISIS. In the Ukraine, we have been very consistent in our messages to Russia that the Minsk Accords must be achieved, they must be implemented, otherwise nothing can be done about the sanction situation in Ukraine. As you're aware, we've appointed a special representative to Ukraine, former ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker. Kurt's a very experienced ambassador, diplomat to the area. He knows the area well. He knows Russia well. He certainly knows our partners well. And he's very clear-eyed about his mission to see if we cannot engage to move the process in Ukraine forward. It has been stalled, as you know, for quite some time. This announcement has been welcomed both by the Russians, and it's been welcomed by the Normandy group that has been engaged with Russia in an effort to move these discussions forward. So we are hopeful we can make some progress in beginning to move the situation in Ukraine to a place of engagement and movement towards achieving a true ceasefire, because the outbreak in violence this year has been just heartbreaking to watch in East Ukraine. We're going to continue to uphold our commitment to the transatlantic relationship, and the President's been quite clear on our commitment to NATO. He's been quite clear on his expectations of others in NATO, and I think all of that, again, very appropriately so. We have affirmed the commitment to Article 5. Unquestionably, that should not be an issue in anyone's minds any longer. In working with Russia and the difficult issues there, I want to acknowledge Brian Hook, who is my Director of Policy Planning, has worked with his team to give us a number of options. Importantly, two important ambassadors in the region, John Teft, who is our ambassador in Moscow, dealing with a very tough situation right now, but also our ambassador in the Ukraine, Maria Yovanovitch. She's doing an outstanding job working with President Poroshenko to continue to help the government in Ukraine strengthen its own governing standards, continue to make progress on the anti-corruption campaign, and strengthen their own justice system, which we think is important to their stability going forward.